Bedtime Story for Adults. The hidden library above the village square. Evening came gently to the village square. It did not arrive all at once. It never did here. It gathered first in the softer places, beneath the eaves, around the worn rim of the old stone fountain, in the narrow lane behind the bakery, and under the chestnut trees, whose leaves were already darkening against the pale sky. The last daylight lingered for a while on upper windows and chimney pots, then thinned into pearl grey and slowly surrendered itself to amber lamps and the first warm glow of rooms being lit from within. The square itself was not large. That was part of its comfort. It could be crossed in less than a minute if someone was in a hurry, though nobody who loved it ever crossed it in a hurry. At the centre stood the fountain, it round and low and polished smooth by time, with a little ribbon of water rising and falling into the basin in a patient, unbroken rhythm. Around it, the paving stones still held the memory of a brief rain that had passed through in the afternoon. In the shallow seams between the stones, tiny silver traces remained, and these caught the growing lamplight in broken pieces of gold. On one side of the square stood the bakery, its windows beginning to fog from warmth within. On another stood the tailor's shop, already dark for the evening. The grocer was in the slow process of closing. One crate brought in from the pavement, one striped awning rolled back, one basket lifted, one lamp lowered behind the window. Above the shops were apartments with flower boxes, curtains, and narrow balconies where potted rosemary and geraniums rested in the dimming air. From somewhere high and unseen, a pigeon shifted under a roof beam. A bicycle leaned against a wall near the archway. A cat crossed the square, paused beside the fountain as though listening to the water, and continued toward the lane beside the stationer's shop. It was there, beside the stationer's shop, that the hidden door stood. Most people noticed the window first. Postcards, writing paper, sealing wax, notebooks bound in cloth, and 3 carefully chosen books turned outward on little wooden stands. Fewer people noticed the narrow cream-coloured door in the side wall, and fewer still noticed the brass plaque beside the handle, which had gone slightly soft at the edges from years of being touched and polished and touched again. The plaque read, "Upstairs, reading room." Nothing more. No flourish, no explanation, no invitation, except the quiet fact of its existence. The door opened on a staircase that smelled faintly of beeswax, paper, old wood, and lavender. It climbed more steeply than the outside of the building would have suggested, and its treads were worn smooth in the middle by many shoes over many years. A small lamp glowed on the landing halfway up, and above it hung a sketch of the square in winter, with snow on the fountain rim and smoke lifting from chimneys into a pale sky. By the time you reached the top, the sounds of the square had already softened. The fountain was there still, though muted now by walls and height. The occasional step on the stones below reached you as an echo rather than a presence. The small upper landing felt suspended between 2 worlds, the ordinary life of the village below and the room waiting behind the frosted glass door. Across that glass, in old gold lettering, were the words, "The reading room." You pushed the door open. Warmth met you first. Not the stale warmth of a crowded place, not the heavy warmth of overheated rooms with shut windows and anxious lights. This was a more layered warmth, built up slowly over the day by books, rugs, wooden beams, shaded lamps, and a cast-iron stove that had been given one log at a time in the patient manner of rooms that understand evening properly. Then came the scent: paper, cloth bindings, polished oak, a kettle just beginning to steam, orange peel resting in a little saucer near the stove, and the faint, dry fragrance that old books hold without ever becoming dusty in any unpleasant sense. The scent of pages that have waited quietly for years and are perfectly content to wait a little longer. The room itself unfolded with attic grace. The ceiling was high in the center beneath dark beams and sloped down on either side into alcoves under the eaves. Shelves ran along most of the walls from floor to nearly ceiling, interrupted only by dormer windows and a round west-facing window above the stove. The floorboards were partly covered with rugs in softened reds, moss greens, and muted blues. A long oak table stood in the center beneath two green-shaded lamps. Around it were chairs that did not match at all, and because they did not match, they felt right. Near the stove there was an armchair with a folded wool blanket. Under one dormer window, a cushioned bench with two pillows and a narrow table for tea. At the far end, a writing desk with thick cream paper, sharpened pencils, envelopes, sealing wax, and a little brass bell that was never rung. By the north shelves, a ladder on rails. Near the door, a coat stand and a basket of umbrellas left to dry. At the small side table by the stove sat the evening tea tray. One large teapot in a quilted cover, cups with blue rims, a honey pot, a dish of dried orange slices, and a plate of almond biscuits. And beside the desk stood the keeper of the library. He was an older man, though not fragile, with silver hair combed back neatly and spectacles low on his nose. He wore a cardigan the colour of chestnut bark with faded elbow patches, a pale shirt, and an expression so entirely at ease that the room itself seemed arranged around it. "Good evening," he said, and his voice was soft enough to prove that softness was all the room required. "You're just in time for the best part of the day." You smiled and asked him what made it the best part. He glanced toward the west window, where the last grey of evening still rested behind roofs and chimneys. "The square below is still awake," he said, "but the library has already become evening." That answer stayed with you even before you fully understood it. You hung your coat by the door. Two others were already there. A navy coat with rain still darkening the collar, and a soft grey shawl. On the umbrella stand rested one umbrella with a carved wooden handle, one plain black one, and a walking stick polished by many hands. These details, small as they were, made the room feel occupied in a reassuring way. A room with traces of others is often kinder than a room arranged only for display. There were three other readers inside. At the long table sat a woman in a deep blue sweater, writing by hand. Beside her lay three opened letters tied with ribbon, and a fourth still sealed, along with a fountain pen, an inkwell, and a pair of spectacles folded on top of an envelope. She wrote slowly, not with difficulty, but with care. Every few lines she paused, looked toward the square, and then returned to the page. Near the stove sat an older woman in a grey shawl with a cloth-bound book open in her lap. She was reading in the gentlest possible way, sometimes following the words, sometimes letting her gaze drift toward the stove door, sometimes not turning a page for several minutes because the warmth and quiet had become part of the reading itself. By the round west window sat a man with a book on village architecture across his knees. He read a paragraph, then looked out over the rooftops, then read another, as if the chimneys and slate roofs below were footnotes to the book. No one seemed bothered by your arrival. No one looked up with that tense curiosity some quiet rooms produce. This library did not treat quiet as fragile. It treated quiet as generous enough to expand and include another person without any strain. The keeper gestured lightly toward the tea table. "There's orange tea this evening," he said, "and chamomile with lemon if you'd rather begin more softly." You chose the orange tea. It seemed to fit the dusk outside. The teapot was warm. When you poured, steam rose carrying the fragrance of black tea, orange peel, and the faintest whisper of clove. The cup was thicker than it looked, and pleasingly heavy in the hand. Nearby, the almond biscuits were pale and thin, their edges browned just enough to promise a little crispness. You took one and sat at the dormer bench above the square. From there, you could see the fountain almost directly below. The water seemed louder at first, simply because the room around it was so calm. Beyond the fountain, the square still held a little movement. A woman with a basket crossed toward the lane beside the grocer's. Someone on a bicycle rolled slowly over the wet stones and disappeared under the archway. Upstairs, windows glowed behind curtains. A lamp was lit in the apartment above the bakery, then another across the square above the tailor's shop. You lifted the cup and let the tea warm your hands before drinking. The first sip was exactly right for the hour. Not dramatic, not sharp. Soft, fragrant, patient. A tea that had no wish to wake you or impress you, only to ease the edges of the day and make room for evening to arrive fully. The almond biscuit snapped delicately when you broke it. It tasted of butter, flour, and just enough sweetness to feel companionable. You sat there for a while doing almost nothing, and that, you noticed, was one of the room's greatest kindnesses. It made doing almost nothing feel complete. Looking out the window, holding a cup, listening to the fountain below and the faint creak of the attic boards as the room warmed further, watching one by one the square's practical tasks come to their end. The grocer's shutters closed, the bakery's front light dimmed. The tailor's window reflected only the square lamps now. A cat returned to the fountain, leapt lightly onto the rim, and then vanished beneath a bench. A church bell somewhere beyond the square marked the hour with a soft, rounded sound that seemed less like timekeeping than atmosphere. After a while, you rose and wandered the shelves. They were not arranged with severe order. There were categories, yes, but the room had clearly been organized by someone who valued mood as much as subject. Travel journals stood beside maps. Essays on rain and weather stood near collections of letters. Poetry mingled with art. Village histories shared a shelf with books about kitchens, winter trains, old harbours, mountain paths, and the architecture of small towns. The spines themselves were delightful company. Rooftops at dusk, letters from the coast road. The sound of fountains after dark, rain on slate, waiting rooms and winter light, the geography of small squares, tea, bread and evening, village bells, quiet roads, harbour windows, snowbound letters, the last lamp in the inn, an atlas of forgotten gardens, the art of resting by the fire. You traced a finger across them the way one might touch the backs of old chairs in a beloved room. At one shelf, tucked between a volume of watercolor village scenes and a book of essays on winter weather, you found a slim cloth-bound book called Windows Above the Square. You opened it at random. The page described a room under the eaves where one could watch the evening gather over rooftops while remaining in warmth. The description was so close to where you were standing that you smiled and closed the book again, deciding to save it for later. Instead, you chose a larger volume called Evening Letters from Small Towns and carried it to the chair near the stove. The chair was upholstered in moss-green fabric, worn smooth on the arms. The blanket over its back smelled faintly of cedar. Beside it stood a little round table with a lamp whose linen shade cast a circle of honey-coloured light, just wide enough for a book, a cup, and nothing more. The stove glowed quietly nearby. On top of it, the copper kettle gave the faintest tick as its metal warmed and settled. Here, the room seemed to deepen. At the window bench, and one still felt a relationship to the square. In the chair by the stove, one entered the library more fully. The outside world remained visible, but at a greater remove. The roofs beyond the round window became shapes in softening light. The fountain below became a steadier murmur. The warmth on your hands and knees became more immediate than the details of the town. You opened the book. It contained short letters written from quiet places. A teacher in a hill village writing by lamp after supper. An innkeeper describing how snow changed the sound of footsteps in the courtyard. A station master recalling the comfort of hearing a kettle sing while rain passed over the platform roof. A widow in a harbour town describing the tide against the wall below her attic room. None of the letters were dramatic. They were full of weather, rooms, lamps, for tea, windows, and small domestic details. They did not pull you forward urgently. They settled around you and joined the atmosphere of the room. After a few pages, you looked up. The older woman in the grey shawl had let her book lower a little in her lap. She was still awake, but only just. Her reading had softened into resting. The keeper passed by and put another small log into the stove. The iron answered with a delicate crackle, then resumed its steady, quiet heat. He moved the kettle half an inch with practiced care, and gave you the sort of nod that asks nothing and says only that all is well. The sky beyond the round window had dimmed another degree. The rooftops were now mostly silhouette. Only the western edges of two chimneys held the faintest trace of pale light. You read another page, then another. A letter from a woman who lived above a stationer's shop in a town very much like this one, who wrote that the nicest part of the evening came after the square had nearly emptied, but before the upstairs lamps were lowered. A note from a baker who described listening to the fountain from bed in summer. A line from an inn guest who wrote, "Some rooms do not merely contain quiet, they teach it to the body." That line stayed with you. It was true of this room. The central table lamps still glowed, but after some time, the keeper crossed over and lowered one of them slightly. The change transformed the room immediately. Not darker exactly, only gentler. The table became less a work table and more a quiet island in the middle of the room. The highest shelves receded softly into shadow. The stove glow seemed deeper. The round window brighter by contrast. The woman writing letters put down her pen at last. She sat a moment with her hands folded over the finished pages, as though grateful to the room for helping her find the right pace for them. Then she tied the letters in ribbon, capped her pen, and carried her cup to the tea table. When she passed the keeper, they exchanged only a few low words. Then she took her coat from the stand, descended the stairs, and was gone. The library did not feel emptier afterward. It felt later. That was all. The keeper refilled the teapot and came to your table. More? He asked. You held out your cup. The second pour was slightly richer, the orange more fully opened in the leaves now. He set a thin slice of dried orange on the saucer. It suits the second cup, he said. You asked him whether evenings were always so quiet in the library. Not always, he said. But even the busier evenings here know how to soften by the end. He looked toward the square through the dormer window. It helps that the village understands evening. Some places try to keep the day going too long. This one doesn't. That felt exactly right. Below, the square had reached that beautiful stage where the practical day had mostly ended, but the warmth of indoor life was still visible. Curtains drawn halfway, lamps in kitchens, the occasional shape moving behind frosted glass, the fountain sounding clearer with every passing minute because the footsteps around it had grown fewer. You moved after a while from the stove chair back to the dormer bench, bringing the book and tea with you. The cushion there had kept a little warmth from before. You pulled the folded blanket over your knees and read by the small side lamp while looking up every few pages at the square below. The fountain, the wet stones, the cat once more by the bench. One upstairs window with a plant on the sill. The bakery now completely dark except for a back room where someone had left a lamp. Somehow, from up here, each little light in the village felt not lonely, but companionable. A room where someone was washing cups. A room where someone was writing a note. A room where someone had left a book open on a chair before stepping away for the kettle. A room where a child had just been tucked in and the lamp lowered. The library did not isolate you from these lives. It made them feel gently present without asking anything of you. There is a comfort in knowing that many quiet lives are unfolding at once. A while later, the man by the west window closed his book on village architecture and stood looking out over the roofs. He didn't leave immediately. He seemed to understand, as you had begun to, that the library moved through several different evenings in the course of one night, and that each deserved its own small measure of attention. At last, he returned the book to its shelf, thanked the keeper, and descended the stairs. Now only 3 of you remained. You, the older woman by the stove, the keeper. Again, the room changed. It no longer felt like a shared reading room in any ordinary sense. It felt like the upstairs of a particularly thoughtful house, one in which anyone who stayed late would be assumed to need warmth, quiet, and time rather than conversation or instruction. The keeper went to the desk and opened a ledger with thick pages. He wrote in it slowly with a fountain pen. The sound of the nib over the paper was one of the smallest and most soothing sounds in the room. The older woman by the stove slipped all the way into sleep. Her book remained open. Her shawl shifted slightly from one shoulder. Her breathing became the calm breathing of someone being perfectly looked after by a room. The keeper noticed, smiled almost invisibly, and laid another folded blanket over her knees without waking her. The gesture was so natural that it seemed less like help than like one of the library's many tiny customs. Perhaps that was another reason the room felt so peaceful. It was full of customs too small to call rules. Refill the teapot before it is needed. Lower one lamp at the right moment. Keep blankets where the draft can reach them first. Never disturb someone dozing safely in a chair. Place the biscuits near the later hour, not the earlier one. Let the square below empty before encouraging anyone to leave. Eventually, the keeper closed the ledger and looked toward the square. "The fountain is louder than the footsteps now," he said softly. You listened. He was right. The footsteps had nearly gone. Once in a great while, someone crossed below, and the sound came up faintly through the window. But then it was gone, and only the fountain remained. The water had become the square's whole voice. "That's how you know it's the best hour?" you asked. He nodded. "Yes. The square is still there, but it has finished asking for attention." He came over with a small plate of butter biscuits and set it beside your book. For the later part of the evening. You thanked him. The biscuit was pale and delicate, with browned edges and a crisp break. It tasted of butter and flour and a little sugar, and somehow it seemed exactly suited to the softened hour. You opened another book, this time the slim one you had noticed earlier, Windows Above the Square. Its pages contained brief essays and sketches, a lamp in an attic room, a cup cooling on a sill, rain over roof tiles, the sound of a church bell through curtains, watching the last shop close from above, seeing a square become a night square rather than a day square. Each piece was small enough to be read in a few minutes, but each left a mood behind that lingered much longer. One essay described sitting in an upstairs reading room and sensing the moment when the room stopped being merely a room and became evening itself. You paused over that sentence. It expressed exactly what the library had become. At first, the room had contained books, chairs, lamps, rugs, and windows. Now it contained an hour, a held hour, a protected one. An hour neither busy nor empty. An hour that could not have taken place so gently anywhere else. The keeper crossed the room and lowered the other central lamp. The whole library deepened into amber and shadow. The long table receded further. The stove took on more presence. The round window became a dark mirror, with a few roofline details still visible beyond it. The shelves close to you held their spines clearly. Those farther away became suggestions, these ranks of quiet company standing under the beams. You noticed then how warm the floorboards were near the stove, and how slightly cooler near the windows. How the blanket over your knees had taken on the room's scent. How the tea in your cup had cooled just enough to become softer without losing warmth. The older woman woke at last, looked down in mild surprise at the extra blanket over her knees, and smiled. "Did I drift off?" she asked. "Beautifully," the keeper said. She laughed softly, marked her place with a ribbon, and left with calm, unembarrassed gratitude. Her departure changed the room once more. Now only you and the keeper remained. He did not hurry to close. Instead, he lit a small candle on the table beside the bench where you sat. Its flame glowed in a glass holder and laid a circle of gold on the wood. "For the last part of the evening," he said. The phrase pleased you because it matched so perfectly the way the room understood time. Not by hours on a clock, so much as by qualities of quiet. First part, later part, best part, last part. Each with its own tea, its own lamp, its own relationship to the square below. You asked him whether he had always kept the library this way. "More or less," he said, though the room taught me almost everything. Some rooms make their preferences known. What sort of preferences? He looked around. They prefer lamps lowered rather than switched off all at once. They prefer letters written by hand. They prefer tea that doesn't announce itself too loudly. They prefer books that keep company without demanding urgency. And they prefer people who understand that sitting still is not wasted time. That answer felt so exactly true that for a moment you did not know whether you were hearing him speak about the room or about the best parts of life in general. Perhaps there was no need to separate the two. You sat quietly for a long time after that, reading a little, looking out a little, listening more than either. The square below had entered full night now. Most windows were dark. The fountain remained. A single upstairs lamp burned above the bakery and another farther up the hill. Somewhere distant, perhaps from the church lane, came the brief sound of a door closing and then silence again. The star you had seen earlier above the roofs had multiplied into 3, then vanished behind thin cloud. The keeper made a slow round of the room. He covered the biscuit plate, rinsed the unused cups, straightened one chair by the long table, checked the stove and added a very small log, closed the ledger, placed a bookmark on the desk, opened the window near the stairs a finger's width and closed it again, perhaps to test the air. Each act felt like part of a ritual of letting the room know it would soon be left in peace. At last, he came to the bench and placed a cream-coloured bookmark beside your cup. A narrow gold line ran along the edge. At the bottom were printed the words, "Read slowly. Evening will wait." You turned it over in your hand and smiled. That seems to be the library's whole philosophy. It tries not to ask too much of anyone, he said. Neither, you thought, did the evening now. There comes a moment in good rooms when leaving no longer feels like being pushed out into the world, but like being gently returned to it with some of the room's quiet still folded inside you. The library had reached that moment. You stood slowly, returned the book to its shelf, and put on your coat. It had grown a little cooler hanging by the door, but the warmth of the room remained in the sleeves and collar. The bookmark went into your pocket. The keeper held the door open for you, not formally, only kindly. At the top of the stairs, you turned once more. The room looked different now from the threshold, smaller perhaps, or more complete. The stove glowed low. The central table rested mostly in shadow. The shelves rose under the rafters. The candle on the bench table burned steadily. The round window reflected a faint shimmer from the square lamps below. The keeper stood with one hand on the back of a chair, as though the library were under his care until the very last latch. "Good night," he said. "Good night." "The square will be there tomorrow," he added, "but the library will remember this evening too." You liked that very much. The stairwell was cooler than the room above, and your footsteps sounded clearer on the worn treads after the attic hush. The framed winter sketch still hung on the landing. The lamp beside it still glowed. Below, when you opened the side door again, the square received you in true night. The fountain was indeed the clearest sound now. The wet stones shone under the lamps. The bakery had gone fully dark. Only one upper window remained lit near the lane. The cat was nowhere to be seen. You crossed part of the square and then looked up. The windows of the hidden library still glowed under the roofline, warm and small above the sleeping village. They seemed not merely lit, but watchful in the gentlest sense, as though they held within them the idea that some hours deserve to be protected from haste. Some rooms do that. They do not simply shelter the body while one is in them. They continue shining in the mind afterward. They remain available as an inner place, a remembered attic of books and lamps and benches and tea, ready to be entered again whenever the world has grown too sharp or too rushed. Yet the memory of the library did not end at the square. As you walked away, it seemed to continue just behind you in some invisible but faithful manner. So the fountain remained in front of you, and the lamps along the paving stones guided your steps. But the quiet attic room above the stationer's stayed present in the mind, like the afterglow of a good fire on the hands. It is possible, perhaps, that certain rooms are never fully left. One departs them physically, yes, but something of their air, their temperature, their chosen pace, accompanies the body into the street and then into the rest of the evening. You slowed near the fountain and rested one hand lightly on the worn rim. The stone was cool from the rain. The water rose and fell in its clear, narrow arc. A late breeze moved once through the chestnut leaves overhead and then passed on. Across the square, one upstairs curtain shifted. Somewhere in the lane beyond the bakery, a gate clicked shut. The cat reappeared, as if by old agreement, sat in the shelter of a bench and wrapped its tail around its paws. The village had reached that deep night stage when every remaining sound feels both distinct and tender. Not because there are more sounds, but because there are fewer. The fountain, a door closing in the distance. A bicycle wheel spun once by a careless hand and then stopped. A murmur from a room behind closed shutters. The quiet air settling between buildings. You imagine the library above, still lit for a little while longer. The keeper lowering one more lamp. The stove holding its red heart. The bench by the dormer window empty now, but still indented faintly from where you had sat. The cup drying near the tea tray. The opened book re-shelved among the evening shelves. The candle on the little table burning down into a final small pool of wax. There was comfort in thinking of it continuing without you for those last few minutes. Comfort also in knowing it would be there tomorrow, and the evening after that, and on winter afternoons, and rainy Sundays, and quiet summer dusks when swallows cut across the square before bed. A room that persists in gentleness gives more than the one evening spent inside it. It lends a person confidence in the continued existence of gentleness itself. When at last you left the square and entered the narrow street leading home, the village seemed arranged entirely in shades of deep blue, warm gold, and softened stone. A lamp burned in the upper room of the cobbler's house. The baker's back door stood closed, but warm bread still seemed to live somewhere in the walls. A small plant on a windowsill caught the street lamp and turned one leaf silver. The paving stones, still faintly damp, reflected your passing in fragments. By the time you reached your own door, the library had changed shape in memory already. It was no longer merely an attic room in a village building. It had become a private interior place, something you could step into again simply by remembering the scent of the tea, or the angle of the round window, or the sound of the fountain rising through the floorboards. Inside your room, perhaps you lit only one lamp. Perhaps you set a cup on the table and did not drink it right away. Perhaps you opened the curtains a little and looked out into the quiet street before drawing them once more. Perhaps you placed the bookmark from the library beside the bed and smiled when you read its little sentence again. Read slowly. Evening will wait. Yes, you thought. Evening had waited for you there. It had done more than wait. It had opened itself patiently and asked almost nothing in return beyond your willingness to arrive without hurry. And now, because the thought of the hidden library is too lovely to leave behind so soon, let us return there once more. Let us imagine the evening not at the moment you arrived, nor even at the later hour when the fountain had grown louder than the footsteps, but in that in-between stretch after the second cup of tea and before the last lamp was lowered, when the room had already become itself and still had time left to unfold. Imagine the dormer bench beneath the eastern window. The cushion is thick with years of use. The fabric is striped in faded green and cream. One pillow has gone slightly softer than the other, and therefore is often chosen first. The sill is broad enough for a cup and a book. The glass, if touched, would feel cool at the edges, where the evening air presses gently from outside. On nights of rain, droplets gather there and slide slowly down, crossing the reflected lamp inside. On winter nights, frost feathers the corners. On spring evenings, the glass may be opened a finger's width and let in the scent of wet soil from the square. On summer nights, the hum of distant conversation rises more clearly from below. Tonight, in memory, the glass holds only the darkening square and the first few lamps. You sit there again. The tea is warmer than your hands at first. Then slowly, the two become equal. The library behind you is arranged in layers of quiet. The books nearest your shoulder seem like watchful companions. The fountain below is still one sound among several. The keeper is at his desk. The woman in the grey shawl is still awake. The writer at the table has not yet tied her ribbons. This is the hour before the best hour, perhaps, though only barely. You open a different book this time. Not letters, but a book of village sketches, little observations gathered over years by someone who clearly loved ordinary scenes enough to preserve them. There is a sketch of a cobbler leaving his shop at dusk and pausing to listen to bells. A sketch of a baker leaning out of an upstairs window in early autumn to feel the first cool air after heat from the ovens all day. A sketch of a child counting the lamps in the square before bed. A sketch of the old fountain in rain. A sketch of an attic room above a stationer's, where the writer claims one can hear the difference between hurried steps and evening steps. You read that line twice, then listen. Hurried steps pass directly through the square. Evening steps belong to it. Hurried steps strike the stone and vanish. Evening steps slow near the fountain, or the bakery, or the shadow of the chestnut tree. Hurried steps do not look up. Evening steps often do. The distinction is small, yet once the room has taught it to you, it becomes obvious. The keeper approaches and adds hot water to the teapot. He does not ask whether you would like more. In good evening rooms, questions are often replaced by gestures that suggest the answer has already been kindly assumed. He notices the sketchbook in your lap. That one, he says, is especially good on nights when no one is in a mood for plot. Does the library have many books for those moods? It was built around them. He says this lightly, but the answer holds truth. Yes, the library was built around moods that need holding rather than stimulating. moods that benefit from pages instead of twists, from chairs instead of events, from windows instead of momentum. It is easy to underestimate the value of such places until one finds oneself in need of them. The writer at the table folds her finished letter. The older woman near the stove turns another page. The keeper returns to his desk. Somewhere in the shelves, a beam gives the slightest old house creak. The library is not silent. It is alive in the mildest possible way. After a few more pages, you wander again. This time you go to the shelf beneath the north window, where books on weather and seasons live together. Here are essays on rain, collections of winter diary entries, books on the first frost, the sound of wind in chimney pots, garden journals, sea mists, mountain weather, and the changing quality of light on village walls over the course of a year. One title catches your attention: Rooms for Bad Weather. You pull it free and smile at the neatness of the phrase. Inside are chapters devoted to different refuges from weather. A harbour tea room in wind, an inn on a snow road, a train compartment during mountain rain, a conservatory in summer thunder, and an upstairs library above a village square in late autumn dusk. Again, the room seems to know itself. You bring the book to the writing desk by the north window, though you do not mean to write. It is simply pleasant to sit at a desk where thick cream paper waits under a brass lamp, where pencils have been sharpened by someone else, and where the window looks not directly onto the square, but across roofs to the slope beyond the village. From here, the world outside looks quieter still. Chimneys, dark roof tiles, a strip of sky, one upper garden wall, a fig tree branch lifted over stone, nothing more. The desk itself is beautiful in quiet ways. The wood is worn smooth where forearms have rested. Ink stains bloom faintly under the lamp like tiny blue shadows from years of letters and notes and marginal thoughts. The blotter is old, but carefully kept. There is sealing wax in a shallow dish, the colour of dark wine. Beside the paper lies an envelope with no address on it, as though someone once intended to write and then found the room enough without words. You imagine, for a moment, writing there. Not a difficult letter, not an important one, only a note to someone who understands evenings. You might write, "Tonight I sat above the square while the fountain outlasted the footsteps." Or, "There is a room under the roof where the lamps are lowered in stages and the tea tastes of orange and thyme." Or simply, "I found a place that asks very little and gives a great deal." Perhaps such notes are the truest sort. But you do not write. The unwritten note belongs to the room as much as a written one would. Sometimes the possibility of writing is enough. Sometimes it is restful simply to sit at a desk where writing could happen and let that unspent energy settle into stillness. The keeper comes by once more, carrying a plate of small butter biscuits. "These are for the middle hour," he says. "The middle hour?" "Yes, before the later hour, before the very best quiet. It seems only fair that each hour should have something of its own." You laugh softly. "And what belongs to the very best quiet?" He considers. "A low lamp, a warm cup, a book that has stopped asking to be read quickly, and the sound of the fountain becoming more important than anything else." That answer pleases you so much that it becomes part of the library at once. By now, the writer at the central table has tied her ribbon and gone. The man at the west window remains, but reads more slowly. The older woman near the stove is closer to sleep than to the next page. The sky has faded almost entirely to night. The keeper lights the small candle on the north desk. Its flame reflects in the dark pane. Outside, one star appears above the ridge. Inside, the desk grows more intimate. For several minutes, you do nothing but sit there and watch the candle tremble slightly whenever the old building breathes. Old buildings do breathe, in their own fashion. A settling in the rafters. A soft lift in the floorboards when warmth moves through them. A tiny sound from a window frame meeting cool air. A change in the room's scent as the stove deepens and the tea leaves open further. The library's breathing is one of the reasons it feels alive rather than staged. It has weathered enough years to know the difference between being used and being disturbed. It likes being used. Cups on tables, chairs drawn close to lamps, books returned not carelessly, but with the affection of renewed company, blankets unfolded and folded again. At last, the man by the west window leaves. Then, eventually, the woman in the grey shawl wakes and leaves. Again, the library narrows its circle of quiet until only you and the keeper remain. Now he invites you to see the west shelf. These are the books most often opened but least often finished in one sitting, he says. You look at the titles. The Pace of Evening, Pages for Snowfall, Harbour Rooms, After the Last Bell, Warm Kitchens, Benches by Windows, The Practice of Quiet, Long Roads, Safe Inns, Fountain Water at Night. What do they have in common, you ask? He smiles. They all know how to accompany rather than instruct. Accompany rather than instruct. That is the entire gift of the room, not to explain how to slow down, not to lecture the mind toward calm, only to accompany it there. You choose the practice of quiet and open it at random. The page speaks of rooms that are furnished not merely with objects, but with permissions. Permission to sit down before one is productive. Permission to let thoughts pass without finishing them. Permission to notice weather. Permission to be drowsy. Permission to hold a cup for warmth rather than thirst. Permission to read without progress. Yes, you think. That is what the hidden library offers. Permission. Permission to have an evening shaped by gentleness rather than utility. You return to the dormer bench for the last stretch of the night. The blanket is warmer now. The cup is refilled one final time. The candle at your side burns low. The fountain below is unmistakably the clearest sound. This time, when you look out, the square no longer seems like a place where anything remains to be done. It is simply a square at night. A fountain, a lamp, wet stones, the shadow of the chestnut tree, and a few dark windows holding sleeping rooms behind them. The keeper, too, has changed with the hour. Earlier he was the host of the library. Now he seems more like its fellow inhabitant. He sits not at the desk, but in the chair the man by the west window used before, and he opens a book of his own. He reads one page, then rests his thumb between the next pages, and looks out over the rooftops without turning further for some time. There is companionship even in that. Not conversation, not shared narrative, only two people within the same gentle hour, each allowing the room to hold them at its own pace. The candle on your table sinks lower, the stove settles, the fountain continues. You imagine the library at other times. In winter, with frost at the dormer edges and snow laid over the square below. In spring, with rain tracing lines down the panes and the scent of damp earth drifting up whenever the door is opened. In summer, with the windows cracked slightly and swallows circling the roofline in the late light. In autumn, with earlier dark and thicker tea, and the square shining after rain. In every season, the room would remain itself. Books, lamps, tea, window, bench, stove, quiet. That continuity is part of its kindness. One need not be a new self to enter it. One need only arrive. After a while, the keeper closes his own book. That, he says softly, not rising yet, is the last part of the evening. You ask him how he knows. Because the room begins keeping the quiet for us. You listen. Yes. You no longer feel you are maintaining stillness by your own effort. The room has become quiet enough to do that work on its own. The fountain below, the low light, the stove, the dark windows, the smell of paper and orange. Everything has joined into a larger hush that carries you rather than requiring anything from you. It is a lovely feeling. Rare, too. The best rooms in life are often the ones that remove one's need to perform calmness and simply offer it instead. Eventually, he rises and makes the final round. The tea tray is covered, the desk lamp shaded, the candle snuffed, the central chair straightened, the bookmark placed where it belongs, the stove checked one last time, the little window by the stairs closed fully now that the air has cooled. No gesture is abrupt, nothing clangs, nothing is done in the bright spirit of ending. Everything is done in the soft spirit of completion. And that is how the library would wish to be remembered. Not as a room that closed, but as an evening that came to rest. And later, when you are resting somewhere warm of your own, perhaps with a lamp nearby and the evening already thinning towards sleep, you may remember the hidden library above the village square, the narrow side door, the brass plaque, the worn stairs, the smell of paper and orange tea, the long table under green lamps, the stove beneath the round window, the writing woman with her ribbon-tied letters, the older reader drifting peacefully to sleep, the keeper saying you were just in time for the best part of the day, the fountain louder than the footsteps, the lamp lowered at the perfect moment, the biscuit on the later plate, the candle lit for the last part of the evening, the bookmark on the windowsill, the sense that the room had become evening itself. And now, if you like, you may imagine yourself there again. The square is below, still touched by rain. The fountain speaks softly in the centre. The side door waits beside the stationer's window. The staircase rises. The landing lamp glows. The attic door opens. Warmth receives you. The cup is filled. The orange tea steams. The blanket rests over the chair. The books stand near and patient. The round window looks west over the roofs. The long table glows. The stove keeps watch. The keeper moves quietly through the room. The square below softens into lamplight. Nothing more is required. No hurry, no explanation. No need to carry the day any farther. Only the chair, only the cup, only the page, only the fountain, only the attic beams above, only the warm floorboards beneath, only the room growing gentler by degrees. The footsteps fade. The fountain remains. The shelves darken softly at the edges. The lamp is lowered. The tea cools slowly in the cup. The book slips lower in the hands. The letters are tied in ribbon. The ledger closes. The stove glows red. The room becomes quieter than the people in it. The library becomes evening itself. And you too may grow still now. You may let your thoughts move like lamplight over old wood, softly, slowly, without effort. The pages rest. The cup warms the hands. The fountain sounds below the window. The rooftops darken. The star appears and vanishes behind cloud. The attic beams hold their warmth. The keeper makes one last round. The candle burns lower. The chair remembers your shape. The library keeps its hush. Nothing more is needed. Only this hidden room. Only these books. Only this window above the square. Only the low, steady voice of water below. Only the warmth of tea and lamp and stove. Only the comfort of knowing such rooms still exist. The square sleeps. The fountain speaks. The shelves keep watch. The lamps dim lower. The fire settles. The bookmark waits between pages. The attic holds its quiet. And you may rest too. Good night.